Hey, you're listening to the Riverdale podcast. This is episode number 210. My name is Jonathan. Welcome to lovely Riverdale, USA. Hey folks, this is an Archie Comics fan podcast. We update every Saturday morning, and every week we split things up 4 ways. First up is the book of the week. That's the comic book I read this week. Sometimes it's a new comic book, sometimes it's an old comic book, but it's always an Archie comic book. We move then to the news of the week. That's what happened in the world of Archie in the week since our last podcast. Then on to new releases. That's what came out this past Wednesday, what will be coming up this coming Wednesday in your digital exclusives of the week. And we're going to wrap up today with a top 5 list. Another great top 5 list, hopefully great. Announced this a couple weeks back. I regret that I neglected to remind everybody last week in all the 4th anniversary hubbub, if you'll allow me to call it that. But we are going to be running down my top 5 favorite titles. Before we jump into the show, I want to remind everyone that you can head over to patreon.com/Riverdale podcast. There you can donate to the show. You can set up very quick, very easy to sign up, and you can set a monthly donation to come my way to support the show and keep it running. We've got a couple more goals coming up. Just a couple weeks back, all of the folks who are pledging or donating money to the show got an exclusive video showing off some of my original art. Everybody got pins and trading cards. There's going to be some exclusive cool stuff coming up for folks who are donating to the show. So if you want to be a part of that, patreon.com/Riverdale podcast. With that said, let's jump into it and get into the book of the week. All right, folks, this week's book of the week is the brand new digital exclusive Pep Digital number 180. This is Archie versus Reggie. This is a bunch of good stuff. Just as with a lot of these collections, just as with Digest and stuff, this is stories from all different decades, all different eras of Archie, but all featuring that rivalry between Reggie and Archie. There are a ton of stories in here I want to get to. One in particular I want to spend some time on. But I do want to mention that this collection is like largely... It's bookended by 2 stories involving duels, like straight up, like glove slapping in the face, challenge you to a duels. And I don't think that one story is based on another. I think that just if you're writing stories about the Riverdale kids, if you put a bunch of dudes in a room and they write them for 50 or 60 years, you end up with a couple stories about duels, and that is fantastic. First story I want to talk about is Dragon Lady. Dragon as in drag racing. This is a story that I have to assume was written and illustrated by Bob Bowling. With a lot of these collections, the individual stories aren't credited. There's just a list at the beginning of the book, which is kind of a drag for sure. But the game I like to play is to read the list of contributors in the front of the book and then kind of try to match them up. So looking at it's almost like a trivia quiz or something. You like look at the story, you go back and look at the contributors, and you figure out who's who. This is definitely Bob Bowling art, and I think by the looks of the story, and the way it reads, I feel like Bob Bowling. And now I'm looking at it and I'm questioning myself. But I feel like this is Bob Bowling, like through and through. This is Archie working at a shop, and there's just some really specific like kind of like 50s greaser kind of talk or something. I don't know what it is because I don't know much about cars and repairing them and engines and whatnot. But there's some real deep like lingo in this story that makes it really interesting. And there's also sort of an omniscient narrator. There's like a like you would have in a novel explaining what's going on in the panels you're looking at, which is really odd for an Archie story for sure. The very late 80s looking story, Driving Reggie Up the Wall, has the short-lived trend of putting on a Velcro suit and jumping up against a Velcro wall. I only ever saw that probably on Nickelodeon, definitely in some sitcoms and stuff. Ridiculous. I love that was worked into a story. There's a really beautiful story called Impossible Journey in here. Definitely some Harry Lucy art here. This is a largely silent story, a pantomime kind of tale of Reggie playing all these pranks on Archie when Archie's trying to leave for a date. He puts on a good suit. Reggie messes it up. He goes back inside, puts on a different suit. It's really good. It's almost like Spy versus Spy level. Fantastic. And that story leads us into the story that I had the absolute best time with. This is Reggie in Dueling Dummies. Now, we do have a list of credited folks on here, as this is a rather modern story. I would place this in the early 2000s or so. Scripted by the great George Gladier, pencils by Fernando Ruiz, inks by John D'Agostino, colors by Carlos Antunes, letters by Jack Morelli. Also, production artist is credited, Adam Walmsley. And this story is about ventriloquism. Awesome. I don't recall ventriloquism like coming back into vogue in the early 2000s or something. But the entire plot centers around ventriloquism. Reggie gets a ventriloquist dummy that looks just like Archie and is causing trouble for Archie because he's going around making fun of him. And apparently Reggie has become a very gifted ventriloquist and can throw his voice and does a very convincing routine. Archie decides very logically that he has to fight fire with fire and get his own ventriloquist dummy of Reggie. And Chuck helps him out. Chuck's got the artistic gene, so he can carve up this ventriloquist dummy and get him looking just like Reggie. And of course, the best way to learn ventriloquism is in your school's ventriloquism club. That makes total sense. I've never heard of a ventriloquist club in a high school. I'm sure they exist. But of course, if you need one in Riverdale, it will exist. The story continues. They're sort of battling each other. And then we find out that coincidentally, Hiram Lodge has recently become very enamored with ventriloquists and has invited a like symposium of sorts, a number of ventriloquists to show up at his mansion for an activity. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I don't know if people are particularly into ventriloquism. I think it's fine. I think it's a great art. But I love the extreme to which everyone is excited about ventriloquism in this particular story. We cut away to another scene in which there are two criminals having a conversation, one very tall criminal and one particularly short criminal. Maybe you can see where this is going. These folks find out that Hiram Lodge is welcoming all these ventriloquists into his home, and they decide that the smaller of the two criminals is going to pose as a dummy, and the larger of the two is going to pose as a ventriloquist, and they're going to go into Lodge Manor and steal a bunch of stuff. Now, I won't tell you much more about that plot, but I think you can surmise that things don't work out exactly as they want them to. What I want to mention here are some Easter eggs in here, which is great. There's a big panel here in this story that's got a bunch of characters, and you see a ventriloquist dummy of Super Duck, one of Cosmo the Merry Martian. There's one of Squimey the Worm, of old school MLJ days, way back in the 40s for that character in particular. And as we go through the story, we find there's also one of Buzzy the Bee Detective, also an old school MLJ character. Really, really good. This story is just classic bonkers Archie. Really seems to be like latching onto a trend, but a trend that, to my memory, didn't really exist. Just grabbed this theme of ventriloquism and made a lengthy story about it, 15, 16 pages, a nearly book length. A nearly book-length story. I'm sorry, I just got to one of the final, the last panel of the penultimate page of the story, in which we find that one of the ventriloquists, after the criminals have been apprehended, we find that one of the ventriloquists is actually an off-duty policeman. We see this gentleman in a yellow polo shirt. He's got, of course, a mustache because he's a policeman. And his ventriloquist dummy is a little police officer with sunglasses on and everything. It's the best. It's so rad. There's a special appearance in this story by Jughead and Hot Dog, which is rad. Really, really, really funny story. To me, this is worth it alone. But, of course, you also get the fantastic Harry Lucy art in that last story I talked about. Absolutely amazing. Jumping ahead a little bit, there's a story called Humility. And this is actually kind of lovely and kind of heartfelt. Reggie's being boastful, doesn't understand why Betty and Veronica would want to hang out with Archie when he's such a great guy and he's so considerate and he's so cool. And Reggie is, left alone at Pop Tate's chocolate shop. Not entirely alone, but of course the folks he wants to spend time with, Betty and Veronica, have left with Archie. And so Reggie and Pop Tate have this little back and forth. And Pop is really honest and really heartfelt with him. And of course, Reggie's the message doesn't totally get through to Reggie, but it's really nice. It's easy to forget that Pop is an observer of these kids, has watched them over the years, and knows a thing or two about them. This was a really sweet story, I thought. I really enjoyed it. There's a story that involves a boxing match between Reggie and Archie. That's really fantastic. Great Harry Lucy art on that as well. There's a story called Screen Test. That is really fantastic and has the old school Pops. It's always nice to see old school Pops. And we wrap up with a story with a substitute teacher named Miss Biltwell. Biltwell. I feel like we've run across that name before. I don't know whether it was in the old radio show or whether Miss Biltwell is like a recurring substitute teacher. If anybody remembers that name being used before, please let me know. It's kind of bugging me. So we'll wrap it up there. Fun collection. Definitely, if you're a Reggie fan, I know I've got some Reggie fans out there. Check this collection out. Lots of good stuff. Lots of fun. And the Velcro suit and the ventriloquists are just amazing. So there it is. Our book of the week. This week, Pep Digital number 180, Archie versus Reggie. All right, folks, in Archie news this week, more casting news. It seems like every week we're rolling out some more information on the cast of Riverdale, which should be filming, if not now, then soon. This month is supposedly the date that the filming for that pilot happens. I'm really excited about it. If you sort of lurk around and read people's Twitter accounts and things like that, you can see that the cast is kind of convening in Vancouver to start filming. So announcements came out via therap.com, supposedly, I guess, I assume some sort of Hollywood site of some kind. I'd never been there before. But they announced this week Ross Butler will be playing Reggie, Daniel Yang as Dilton, and Cody Kearsley as Moose. Now, people are again losing their minds that people of color are being cast in roles of characters that are traditionally white, such as Dilton and Reggie. Again, I really can't understand where everybody's coming from on this. If this is something that you're upset about, I would really suggest that you take a moment and think about why this bothers you as much as it does. I honestly don't see why a person of color would be incapable of playing a character who is traditionally white. If that's something that you can explain to me, feel free to write in and let me know. I think the casting looks good. I think that we'll have to wait and see the performances of the actors. Certainly we can rate the performances of the actors once we've seen the pilot, in the event that we actually do see the pilot, which again I'm very, very much hoping for. I think this is going to be a really, really interesting show. Whether it is successful or unsuccessful, I think it's going to be an interesting piece of history. People Magazine, People.com, posted an article this week looking back at all of the various media incarnations of the Archies. The Archie characters. And a lot of that is super interesting. Some of them are hits, some of them are misses, but they're all super interesting, and this is going to fall right into that line. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I like getting all the casting news every week and seeing a diverse, cool cast. So I'm really, really excited about that. Again, if folks want to write in and defend their side of it, I honestly do not see the side. I do not understand the side of folks who are offended by these casting choices. So if you want to write in and I don't want to say defend, but if you want to write in with your thoughts about it, I will definitely share them on this show. I don't want to get into a sense of having a debate or anything, but if you want to share your side, definitely feel free to write in. On a lighter side, Chip Zdarsky, the writer of Jughead, writer and artist of a bunch of great books, Sex Criminals, Kaptara, Howard the Duck, posted a fantastic blog post along with a very charming hashtag of Chip for Svensson. Chip launched what I assume to be a sort of farcical campaign to play the famous custodian of Riverdale High, Svensson. I would love that. I think that would be fantastic. If that comes through, I would laugh so hard. Gosh, that would be really, really good. I don't think that's something he's actually campaigning for, but it is super, super funny. And there is a cool blog post on his Tumblr. So check that out. Finally, in some Fernando Ruiz and Dan Parent news, as a lot of you, I assume all of you are aware, Die Kitty Die is the brand new creator-owned book from Dan and Fernando. They're doing a sort of limited edition hardcover. So if you head over to diekitty.die.com, you can pre-order that hardcover. This is going to be a limited series, and when those issues are all released digitally, they're going to drop a hardcover book. So you can get your pre-order in now at diekitty.die.com. Don't miss it. The first issue is out. Second issue is coming soon. I'll be talking to those guys on the show soon about that. So check that out. Get excited. And that is your news of the week. More casting news for Riverdale. Die Kitty Die hardcover. Chip for Svensson. Hashtag Chip for Svensson. There it is. All right, folks, new releases for this past Wednesday, March the 9th, are as follows. Archie Funhouse Comics Annual Digest number 19, out this week, as well as the Hangman number 3. Looking ahead to this coming Wednesday, the 16th, we've got World of Archie Comics Double Digest number 57, as well as Archie Volume 1 trade paperback. Now, some lists showed this coming out this week. Some lists showed it coming out next week, so keep an eye out at your shops. This is the new trade paperback. It's got the first 6 issues of the relaunch of Archie. So that's... I guess maybe it's the first 5? Yeah, I guess it's the first 3 Fiona issues, the Annie Wu fill-in issue, and then the 5th issue, which has the Veronica Fish artwork. It's also got the Jughead first issue in there as a backup. So that's a cool collection. So that, if it's not in your shop now, it'll be out next week. On the digital side of things... this week we got, of course, this week's book of the week, Archie versus Reggie, came out just yesterday, the 11th. And coming up next week, very excited about this. Next week, Friday the 18th, we'll get the digital exclusive as part of the Archie 75 series, celebrating the 75th anniversary of Archie Andrews, Josie and the Pussycats. This is a cool collection. There was a preview of this that went up over on Comics Alliance. It's got some early Josie issues, as well as some Josie and the Pussycat stories. Looks like a great collection. Looking forward to checking that out. So those are, there they are, your new releases for this past Wednesday the 9th, this coming Wednesday the 16th, and your digital releases of the week from Archie Comics. All right, folks, and rounding out the show today, as I said at the top of the show, top 5 list. The top 5 list I've set out for today is top 5 favorite titles. So top 5 favorite ongoing series. Miniseries, I guess, would fall into that as well. Largely with Archie Comics, you've got ongoing series. So, 5 favorite titles. And this turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I actually have I made a list, and then I chose my 5, and then I made a list of alternates, and then some of the alternates made it into the list. It got a little bonkers. But I'm gonna count down. I'm gonna start with the most obvious, I guess, and we'll go from there. Of course, Archie Archie itself, Archie Volume 1, I guess I'll say, now that we're into Volume 2. I'm going to say that main flagship book is fantastic. I mean, I've been reading it issue by issue for the last, more than 60 issues, probably 70 issues or so. And of course, I've got, scattered collections of stuff prior to that. I've got, behind me some of the archives and stuff. So I've read a ton of stuff from the Archie main book. And frankly, that's got to make the list. That's where a lot of the major characters first showed up. It's where a lot of experimentation has taken place. It's where Archie got married. It's where the Man from Riverdale storyline we talked about a couple weeks back happened. A lot of great stuff has happened in that main Archie book. Recent years, the Archie and Valerie relationship, which I love so much, came about in the pages of Archie. So for sure. Second most obvious in my top 5 is Jughead. Notably, probably Volume 2. I haven't read much of Archie's pal, Jughead, which was the initial Jughead book that launched in the 40s, I believe. Mostly, I love the modern-day one. That big, long run with Craig Boldman and Rex Lindsay was really, really fantastic. I especially liked the stuff that was done in the last few years of the Jughead title. Of course, you can go way back to the 80s. You can get into, punk rock, Jughead. John Troughton and I talked a bit about that last week. I love that stuff. And then consistently, as I was saying, the modern stuff, I really loved that great Private Eye run that they've been reprinting in the Archie and Jughead digest, with Jughead as the sort of trench-coated Private Eye solving mysteries. I loved one of the last storylines they ran in that book was Jughead and his father having a disagreement, and Jughead leaving his home and staying with a number of folks around Riverdale. It was a really, really good story that, dealt with the complicated nature of families, while also being playful and also giving Jughead the ability to kind of bounce off other characters and see how he interacted with them. I loved that storyline. And of course, Jughead is probably my 100% favorite Archie character. He's one of the best. So there he is in my top 5. I'm gonna go. I'm still sort of forming this list as I look, but I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna go for Archie Giant Series. That's gonna make it into my top 5. For those who don't know, this was a long-running book. I believe it came out every other month, or it may have come out quarterly. The numbering is really strange. It's a very kind of mysterious book. And it's hard to get. It's hard to get a run. It's hard to really understand. But largely, what it was oversized collections of kind of character-specific stuff. Like I definitely have some Josie and the Pussycats, Archie giant size issues. I've got some Little Jinx. They focused on other characters. They focused oftentimes on characters that didn't have their own books. There were Sabrina stories in the Giant Size series when Sabrina didn't have her own book. There were Little Archie stories when the Little Archie book wasn't being published. So if you ever look at... if you look it up on My Comic Shop or something and scroll through and look at all the different characters that showed up in that series, it's a really, really cool thing. It's sort of one of my dreams to have a long run of Archie Giant series. So Archie Giant Series gets my number 3 spot there. Next in the series is Life with Archie. Anyone who's a long time listener of this show, been listening since the beginning, knows how much I loved reading Life with Archie. And I guess I should clarify, this is Life with Archie Volume 2. There was an original Life with Archie back in the 60s. I guess it started in the 60s. Yeah, I think that the Archies originally appeared in Life with Archie. I could be wrong there. But that's something that ran through the 70s. I'm talking about Life with Archie, the newer book looking at the married life of Archie, written almost entirely by Paul Kupperberg, with art early on by Norm Brayfogle, and then later on by Pat and Tim Kennedy and Fernando Ruiz. This was just a really well-told story, and just unusual in a lot of ways. Atypical in a lot of ways. Not only was it sort of, two alternate stories in one book, it was magazine-sized. The front of the book featured the future adventures of Archie married to Veronica. The back was the future adventures of Archie married to Betty. So, oversized magazine format, 2 stories in one, 2 full 20 to 22 page stories in each issue. So a great deal. And then not only was it, a comical and fun and heartfelt story, but it was also kind of a soap opera. So it did a lot of different things and had a lot of surprises, and was just a really, really exceptional comic book. I had the pleasure of talking to Paul Kupperberg about the book when it was coming out, and that was fantastic, getting a lot of my questions answered and talking to him about how he wrote these 2 parallel storylines and didn't confuse the 2. That was really, really great. So there it is. I'm going to put Life with Archie at, where am I? At the 4th on my list, I guess. And the last one I'll say, before I get to my alternates, I'm going to say, I don't know if it's my number 1. Maybe Archie is actually my number 1 and will work in the opposite direction. But making my top 5 for sure. And the last I am listing on this list is Josie, a classic Josie book by Dan DeCarlo and Frank Doyle. Of course, the book that would go on to become Josie and the Pussycats, starring Josie and Melody. This early incarnation, as we talked about with John Troughton last week, featured Pepper. Fantastic, sassy, sort of cat's eye glasses wearing character. I really, really like those early Josie stories. Frank Doyle and Dan DeCarlo could really do no wrong in my eyes. They did a lot of amazing stories together over 25 or 30 years working together. And this was pretty early on in their collaborations, launched in the early 60s. And it's very evocative and indicative of the era in which it was created. There's a lot of hip slang. There's some really fantastic fashion in those stories. Some of it definitely looks dated, is definitely 60s fashion, but is rendered so well, drawn so well, and just looks so classic. And the character of Melody is always funny. Josie is such a strong, powerful sort of female character. And I love the sort of backstory of Josie being based on Dan DeCarlo's wife, Josie. And I like that it's sort of it sort of stands as like a prototype of what would go on to be Josie and the Pussycats, a hugely successful franchise. And the covers, the early Josie covers, are absolutely fantastic. Really, really, really beautiful. If you can ever find these issues in the bins at a convention, grab them up. I was at a convention a few years ago and found a bunch of them for $2 a piece and grabbed every single one I could afford. Because you don't find them often, and when you do, it's hard to get them at a good price. But keep an eye out for those Josie stories. And as I talked about in the last segment coming up next week, in that Josie and the Pussycats digital collection, there's 2 or 3 stories from the early Josie books. So keep an eye out for those. So there's my top 5. I guess in no particular order, as it turns out. Archie, Jughead, Archie Giant Size series, Life with Archie, and Josie. So my top 5 today. Ask me in 2 weeks. Might be different. Who knows? And then I listed a few alternates. So I'll list those off real quick. So honorable mention goes to Madhouse, which I don't necessarily love, but I respect. I think it's a really strange title. Craig Yo put together a great collection that I have that goes through some of the odder parts of the Archie's Madhouse book that launched in the mid '60s in the wake of Mad Magazine. Afterlife with Archie, definitely an important book. Goes on that alternate list. That Wilkin Boy is super fun. I want to get back to those issues and talk about more of that series because I like it a lot. Betty and Veronica, for sure, classic book, especially those late 80s issues I like the most. And Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which is probably might be my favorite book being currently published by Archie. I love that book a lot. So there you have it. Feel free to write in with your top 5 favorite titles. I will share those next week if anyone sends them in. And I'll try to give you guys a heads up in the future when we're doing top 5s because I love to have other folks' lists just to get a few different perspectives in on any particular question. All right, on the way out today, you know the drill. I want to remind you guys that this show updates every Saturday morning. You can find us on Stitcher. You can find us at RiverdalePodcast.com. And you can find us on iTunes. If you're listening to us on iTunes, please write a review for the show. Reviews for the show are hugely helpful in helping people find the show. Boost us up in that crazy Apple algorithm. So help us out with a review. It would be a big, big help. If you want to get in touch, you can get in touch through Facebook, facebook.com/Riverdale Podcast, at Riverdale Pod on Twitter. You can write to RiverdalePodcast@yahoo.com. You can go to Riverdale Podcast/ask. Type in your question there, and we will get to it. You can also call in and leave a voicemail. You can call in to 573-427-2443. That's 5734-ARCHIE. Thank you guys very much for listening. Thanks to all of the Patreon patrons, the Patreon supporters. Head over to patreon.com/Riverdale Podcast to support the show. If you need any more me in your life, you can head over to about.me/Jonathan Merrifield. That's got links to all the stuff I'm working on online. And while you're listening to podcast, go over and check out Radio Free Riverdale. There's a couple of folks who are maybe outsiders to the world of Archie comics who are reading those books. And it's a nice counterpoint to this podcast. I've been listening to it and enjoying it quite a bit. So go over and check that out. Tell them I sent you. Let's get out of here. Let's wrap it up for this week. Again, thank you guys so much for listening. It's a pleasure to speak with you every week. My name is Jonathan, and I will see you again next week, right here in lovely Riverdale, USA.